In the small, fog-enshrouded town of Uldridge, an ancient library stood as a relic of times long past, its stone walls covered in ivy, its leaded glass windows foggy with the breath of centuries. The Uldridge Library had always been a source of pride for the townspeople, who believed it housed not only books but also the secrets of the town's dark history. Little did they know just how dark these secrets could be. Eleanor, a young librarian with a penchant for the supernatural, had just started her job at Uldridge Library. Her fascination with the paranormal made her eager to uncover the mysteries whispered about in the town's shadowy corners. Her curiosity was particularly piqued by an old leather-bound book she found hidden in the library's restricted section. Its pages were blank, except for a cryptic inscription on the inside cover, asterisk, to those who seek the truth of Uldridge, beware the eyes that watch from the dark. Asterisk. As nights grew longer, Eleanor began experiencing strange occurrences. Books fell from shelves without reason, whispers echoed through the empty halls, and a chilling draft seemed to follow her wherever she went. Unnerved but undeterred, Eleanor decided to investigate after hours, thinking the quiet of the night might reveal more about the library's secrets. On a particularly stormy night, she stayed late, her only company the flickering lights and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the old windows. As midnight approached, the air grew inexplicably cold, and the faint smell of mold and decay filled the library. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter around her and ventured into the labyrinth of bookshelves in the oldest part of the library. Suddenly, a soft sobbing broke the silence. It seemed to come from the end of a dark corridor. Heart-pounding, Eleanor followed the sound, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The sobbing grew louder as she approached the archival room. With a trembling hand, she pushed open the door. Inside, she found nothing but rows of ancient manuscripts and the lingering scent of old paper. As she stepped in, the door slammed shut behind her, extinguishing her flashlight and plunging her into darkness. The sobbing stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then a voice, barely more than a whisper, filled the room. "Leave now before they find you." Panicking, Eleanor fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. From the corners of the room, faint glimmers of light appeared, revealing pairs of eyes watching her. Not human eyes, these were large, unblinking, and filled with malice. The air grew thick as whispers swirled around her, speaking in tongues she could not understand. Gathering all her courage, Eleanor shouted into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" The eyes converged into a single, dark figure that slowly materialized in front of her. "The book," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of multiple timbres, both male and female. "Return it to its place, or suffer the fate of those who dare uncover what should remain hidden." Without warning, the lights flickered back on, and the room was empty. The eyes were gone, and the door swung open freely. Shaking, Eleanor ran from the room, clutching the mysterious book to her chest. She spent the rest of the night poring over old town records and discovered tales of a secret society that had founded the library, their purpose shrouded in mystery and linked to otherworldly entities known as the Watchers. The society members were said to protect Uldridge from these beings by keeping their presence a secret, using the library as a vault for dangerous knowledge. Eleanor knew she had to return the book, but her desire to uncover the truth about the Watchers and the secret society was overpowering. She resolved to delve deeper, unaware that her actions might provoke consequences beyond her comprehension. As dawn broke, bringing light to the library's dusty corners, Eleanor prepared to face another night, armed with nothing but her resolve and the cryptic book. Little did she know, her search would unearth horrors that the town of Uldridge had kept buried for centuries, horrors that would not hesitate to emerge from the shadows to reclaim the silence of their secrecy. And so, as the sun set, casting long shadows through the library windows, Eleanor readied herself for what was to come, the whispers of the night already beginning to echo through the walls, promising revelations and threats alike. As dusk settled over Uldridge, shadows lengthened across the cobbled streets, reaching like dark fingers towards the old library. Inside, Eleanor prepared herself for another night of revelations and possibly dire consequences. She took the cryptic book under her arm, its leather cover cold and slightly clammy to the touch, as if it contained the heartbeat of something not quite alive. Eleanor's footsteps echoed in the empty halls, each sound amplified by the silence enveloping the library. She made her way to the reading room, the site of most paranormal occurrences reported by past librarians. Candles flickered on the large oak table as she set up her workspace, the dancing lights casting eerie, contorting shadows on the walls. Tonight, she began with the oldest records, texts written when the library was founded nearly 3 centuries ago. The manuscripts were brittle and musty, their pages yellowed with age. As she pored over the ancient texts, the air around her grew inexplicably colder, and the faint sound of chanting seeped through the walls. It was a low, mournful dirge that seemed to come from the very bowels of the library. Ignoring the goosebumps on her arms, Eleanor focused on a particularly old document, an account of the library's inauguration, and the secret pact made by the town's founders with entities they referred to only as the guardians of knowledge. These entities demanded secrecy, the document stated, and in return, they offered protection against unnamed horrors lurking just beyond human perception. Suddenly, the candlelight dimmed, as if a cold breath had washed over them. The room temperature dropped, and Eleanor's breath formed misty clouds in the air. She felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Swallowing her fear, she whispered into the dimness, "What do you want from me?" No response came, only the sound of her voice, strangely distorted, bouncing off the walls. Then, the candles extinguished themselves, one by one, as if snuffed out by unseen fingers. Eleanor's heart raced. She reached for her flashlight, but found it unusually cold and slippery to the touch. With a click, the beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the far end of the room. There, among the shelves, a figure loomed, a shadow within shadows, taller than any man, with the vague outline of antlers or branches twisting from its head. Its eyes, if it had eyes, were hollows deeper than the darkest night. Eleanor's voice trembled as she spoke, "I'm returning the book. I don't want any part of this." The figure remained motionless, its silence more threatening than any words. Then, with a sound like rustling leaves, it moved, drifting between the shelves, circling around her. Eleanor felt the temperature drop further, the air now prickling with static electricity. She opened the book to the first page, noticing for the first time small, barely perceptible writing that appeared to be in another language, a script that twisted and writhed as she tried to focus on it. As she stared, the text began to make sense, revealing a warning of a curse and an entreaty to return the book to its rightful place in the sealed crypt beneath the library. The lights flickered back on, startling Eleanor. The figure was gone, but the threat lingered in the air, a palpable tension that made her skin crawl. She knew she couldn't ignore the library's warnings any longer. Gathering her courage, she resolved to find the crypt and return the book, hoping it would appease whatever forces she had awakened. Armed with only a flashlight and the cryptic book, Eleanor descended into the bowels of the library. The basement was seldom visited, a place of shadows and forgotten memories. The air was thick with the smell of damp and decay. She navigated through cluttered storage areas filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, which, in the ghostly half-light, looked like spectral figures waiting in silence. Her flashlight flickered as she approached an old iron door set into the foundation. It was locked with a large, rusted padlock. As she examined it, the air grew icy, and the mournful chanting resumed, louder now, as if coming from directly behind the door. Eleanor's hands shook as she picked up a nearby rock and smashed it against the padlock. After several tense, breathless moments, the lock broke, clanging onto the concrete floor. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Eleanor hesitated, the air emanating from the opening chilling her to the bone. But she knew there was no turning back. She stepped forward, her flashlight cutting a swath of light through the thick, oppressive darkness as she descended into the crypt, unaware of the true nature of the darkness that awaited her, or how deep the roots of Eldritch's secrets really went. As she made her way deeper, the chant grew into a cacophony, echoing off the damp stone walls, resonating with a frequency that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Eleanor's descent felt endless, each step taking her deeper into the earth, further from the safety of the world above. The staircase spiraled down like a coil, its end swallowed by darkness. She stopped for a moment to catch her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of mold and something else, something ancient and forgotten. The chanting had now morphed into a guttural whispering, words not spoken in any human tongue, but rather felt as a visceral dread that clawed at her mind. Eleanor pressed on, her flashlight beam bouncing off wet stones, until the staircase ended abruptly at a small, arched doorway. Beyond lay a chamber, vast and filled with shadows that seemed to writhe and shift as she entered. The air was colder here, the atmosphere suffused with a palpable sense of waiting, as if the room itself was alive and aware of her presence. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, made of dark stone, its surface covered with carvings so intricate they seemed to move under her flashlight's beam. Upon the altar rested a pedestal, and on it, a receptacle shaped to fit the book she carried. Eleanor approached, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, each sound amplified into a thunderous roar. She hesitated before the altar, the book heavy in her hands. As she moved to place the book into its resting place, the whispering crescendoed into a deafening silence that hung heavy in the air. Her hand trembled as she set the book down, and the moment it touched the pedestal, the chamber was flooded with a blinding light. When her vision cleared, Eleanor found herself no longer alone. Around her, figures materialized from the shadows, their forms vague and shifting, more wraith-like than human. They circled the altar, their eyes, if they had eyes, glowing faintly with a spectral light. One of the figures stepped forward, its form stabilizing into that of an old man, his face lined with eons of sorrow. His voice, when he spoke, was the rustle of dry leaves. "You have returned the tome, but your part in this is not yet done." Eleanor backed away, her mind reeling. "What do you mean?" "I've done what you asked." The figure's eyes seemed to bore into her soul. The book was but a key, and by returning it, you have opened the door. You must now face what lies beyond, for it is tied to the heart of Eldritch itself. You have unleashed it, and only you can rebind it. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as understanding dawned. The library, the town, and all its dark secrets were bound together, woven into a tapestry of arcane power and ancient pacts. And she, unwittingly, had stepped into the center of it all. The figures began to fade, dissolving back into the shadows from which they had emerged, leaving Eleanor alone with the weight of her new responsibility. The chamber felt oppressive, the air thick with the promise of challenges yet to come. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. With the book now resting in its designated place, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted subtly. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, replaced by a tingling anticipation. Eleanor knew that whatever was coming, whatever she had unleashed, was only beginning to stir. Her flashlight flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, she thought she saw the shadows move, twisting into forms too terrible to comprehend. When the light returned, the chamber was as it had been, silent and watchful. Determined, Eleanor made her way back to the staircase. As she ascended, the whispering faded, replaced by the dull roar of a gathering storm, as if the earth itself was responding to the shift in the deep. By the time she reached the surface, the library was bathed in the eerie light of a full moon, its beams casting long, ominous shadows across the stone floors. Exhausted but resolute, Eleanor knew that her journey was far from over. She had to understand the full extent of the library's secrets and the nature of the pact that bound the town to its shadowy protectors. The town of Eldritch, with its fog-enshrouded streets and whispered secrets, was now her responsibility, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. As she walked through the empty halls of the library, her steps echoing in the quiet, Eleanor felt the weight of history bearing down on her, the eyes of the past watching, waiting to see what she would do next. The night was still young, and the library, with its ancient books and hidden chambers, held many more secrets to uncover. And somewhere, deep within the bowels of the earth, something ancient stirred, its hunger awakened by the return of the tome. It sensed the presence of the living above, and its desire to breach the confines of its ancient prison grew with each passing moment. Eleanor moved quietly through the dark corridors of the library, her senses heightened to every whisper and creak. The moonlight filtering through the windows provided little comfort, casting ghostly patterns on the walls that seemed to shift and play tricks on her eyes. Every shadow seemed to pulse with hidden life, every book spine appeared to be a row of vertebrae, twisting as she passed. The quiet was almost deafening, filled with the anticipation of a storm yet to break. Eleanor's thoughts raced as she pondered her next move. She had to understand the nature of the entity she had stirred. Returning to the archival room, she delved into more texts, searching for any reference to the Guardians and the true nature of the pact made centuries ago. As she read, a sudden cold gust swept through the room, sending papers flying like disturbed birds. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she spun around, flashlight piercing the darkness. The beam settled on a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, or something that once resembled a man, his features blurred and indistinct, edges shimmering unnaturally. "I know what you seek," the figure spoke, its voice a mixture of many tones, both male and female, old and young. Eleanor steadied her voice. "What are you? Why are you here?" "I am a remnant," the figure replied, "a memory of the pact and a guardian of the balance. You have unleashed a power that you do not understand. It will consume this town if not contained. What must I do?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's form flickered like candlelight. "You must enter the realm of the Guardians. There you will find the answers you seek. But beware, the path is perilous and the truths you uncover may shatter your soul." Before she could respond, the figure dissolved into the air like mist, leaving Eleanor alone once more. Her mind raced with the weight of her task. She needed to enter a realm she barely understood, guided by the cryptic advice of apparitions and ancient books. Gathering her courage, Eleanor prepared for her journey into the unknown. She packed old maps, arcane artifacts, and protective talismans from the library's collection, items whispered to possess properties of safety and guidance. As she assembled her tools, the library seemed to groan under the weight of an impending doom. The walls themselves vibrated with a low hum, as if resonating with the energies unleashed by the book's return. Leaving the library, Eleanor stepped into the chilly night air. The town of Aldridge lay silent, enveloped in a thick fog that seemed to swallow light itself. She headed towards the outskirts where, according to the texts, the entrance to the Guardian's realm was located. Her journey took her through the winding streets of Aldridge, past shuttered windows and locked doors. The townsfolk, sensing the change in the air, had barricaded themselves inside, leaving the streets deserted, a ghost town swallowed by mist. Eleanor's map led her to an ancient stone well, hidden away in the forest that bordered Aldridge. It was said to be a gateway, used by the founders of the town to communicate with the Guardians. The well was overgrown with vines, its stones cold and slick with moss. With a deep breath, Eleanor approached the well, the artifacts in her bag clinking softly. She could feel a pull, a magnetic draw to the dark water below. The air was charged with electricity, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. She carefully laid out the talismans in a circle around the well, reciting incantations from the library's texts. As she spoke the ancient words, a wind began to swirl around her, the leaves and vines dancing as if alive. The surface of the water in the well stirred, and a low, pulsing growl echoed from the depths. Eleanor's heart pounded as she watched the water churn. She knew she was on the brink of something unimaginable. As the wind howled and the well roared, she steeled herself and stepped into the circle of talismans, ready to descend into the Guardian's realm. Just as her foot crossed the threshold, the ground trembled, and a brilliant light burst from the well, enveloping her in its glow. She felt herself being pulled forward, down into the abyss below, the voices of the past and present merging in a deafening cacophony. As she descended into the darkness, the last thing Eleanor saw was the night sky of Eldridge, a blanket of stars watching silently as she plunged into the unknown depths of the Guardian's realm, her fate intertwined with the ancient secrets and curses that lay buried beneath the town. In the depths, where light seemed a memory, Eleanor's descent felt both eternal and instantaneous, a paradoxical journey through a tunnel of swirling, spectral lights and whispering shadows. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient stone, the walls of the well barely visible in the dim light provided by the glowing talismans she clutched. Her ears rang with the sound of her own heartbeat, mixed with the distant, ghostly echoes of the Guardian's chants. As the descent slowed, Eleanor found herself in a vast cavern, its ceilings lost in shadow, the ground beneath her a mosaic of stones worn smooth by time. Before her stretched a narrow pathway, flanked on either side by deep, dark abysses that whispered of forgotten eras. The path itself was illuminated by a faint, phosphorescent moss that clung to the rocks, casting an eerie, greenish glow on the walls. With each step, Eleanor felt the weight of the cavern's gaze upon her, as if the very rocks were alive and watching. The air grew colder, the path narrower, and the whispers louder. It was as if the cavern itself was alive, breathing and speaking in a tongue that was ancient and arcane. Suddenly, the path opened into a larger chamber, where the air was filled with a thick, oppressive mist. Shapes moved within the mist, shadowy figures that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of sight. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, much like the one in the library, but older and covered with symbols that glowed with an otherworldly light. Eleanor approached the altar, her footsteps echoing ominously. As she drew closer, the figures in the mist seemed to draw back, congregating around the edges of the chamber, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Upon the altar lay a book, older and more worn than the one she had returned to the library. Its cover was etched with symbols that matched those glowing on the altar. As Eleanor reached out to touch the book, the air around her grew electric, the hairs on her arms standing on end. A voice, neither male nor female, young nor old, echoed through the chamber, the pact must be renewed, lest the balance falter. Eleanor hesitated, her hand hovering over the book. "What pact?" she asked, her voice echoing back to her in whispers. "The pact between your world and ours," the voice replied, the shadows stirring as it spoke. "A pact of knowledge for protection, of sacrifice for safety." "And what sacrifice is needed?" Eleanor's voice was steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "One of self," the voice intoned. "A guardian to watch over the balance, to keep the darkness at bay." Eleanor took a deep breath, understanding the weight of the decision before her. To become a guardian, to remain in this ancient realm, to forever leave behind the world she knew, or to refuse and risk unbalancing the delicate order that had protected Eldridge and its people for centuries. As she contemplated her choice, the figures in the mist began to move closer, their forms becoming more distinct. They were the guardians of old, each having made the same sacrifice, their eyes filled with sorrow but also with resolve. Eleanor looked back the way she had come, thinking of the library, of the fog-shrouded streets of Eldridge, of the life she had known. Then she turned back to the altar, her decision made. "I will do it," she said, her voice resolute. The chamber seemed to exhale, the mist swirling as if in response. "Then the pact is sealed," the voice said, a note of finality echoing through the cavern. Eleanor placed her hand on the ancient book, and as she did, light flooded the chamber, blinding and pure. The symbols on the altar and the book flared brightly, then dimmed, settling into a soft glow that filled the space with warmth. The guardians around her nodded, their forms beginning to fade, returning to the shadows from which they had come. Eleanor felt a surge of power coursing through her, the knowledge and memories of the guardians flowing into her, their whispers becoming her whispers, their watchful gaze her own. As the light dimmed and the chamber grew quiet, Eleanor stood alone at the altar, now the new guardian of the balance. The path back to the library sealed, her new life began in the depths, watching over Eldridge and its secrets, ensuring the darkness was kept at bay, and the pact upheld. And above, in the library, the book she had returned lay quietly on its pedestal, its pages fluttering slightly as if in a breeze. A new chapter was beginning, both for Eldridge and for Eleanor, in a story that was far from over. In the depths of the cavern, Eleanor stood resolute, the weight of her new guardianship settling around her like a cloak. The chamber was silent now, the once ominous whispers of the past guardians fading into a hushed reverence. The air felt sacred, charged with ancient power, and Eleanor knew her life above was now just a distant echo of what used to be. Above in Eldridge, the library remained a silent sentinel, its walls holding the secrets of the town and the whispers of the vanished Eleanor. But within the town, subtle changes began to weave their way through the streets like tendrils of mist in the early dawn. As the days passed, residents noticed a calm settling over Eldridge, a peace that hadn't been felt in generations. The frequent storms that used to lash at the town's windows and doors diminished, and the fog that had perpetually cloaked the streets lifted, revealing starlit nights more clear and brilliant than any could recall. Children slept soundly, nightmares of shadowy figures ceased, and an unspoken ease took root in the hearts of all who lived there. In the library, the leather-bound book that Eleanor had returned seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Its presence, once a source of ominous dread, now brought a sense of balance and protection. It lay on its pedestal in the restricted section, which had become a place of quiet respect rather than fear. But not all was serene. At times, when the moon was just a sliver in the sky, a faint sobbing echoed through the library halls, a mournful sound that seemed to mourn Eleanor's sacrifice. The older townsfolk whispered of the librarian who had given herself to protect them all, their voices a mix of reverence and sorrow. One evening, as the anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance approached, a curious phenomenon occurred. The library glowed with a gentle, ethereal light, no source visible to the naked eye. The townspeople gathered outside, their faces illuminated by the soft luminescence that seeped through the library's ancient windows. Inside, the air shimmered slightly, and for those who dared to be present, the figure of Eleanor appeared, her outline blurry and shifting. She was part of the library now, part of its stones and its lore. Her voice, when it came, was both hers and not hers, imbued with the whispers of the ages. "Thank you," she said, her voice a gentle caress against the skin. "Do not grieve for me, for I am still here, in every page you turn, in every whisper of the wind through these hallowed halls. I watch over you, as I always will." Tears filled the eyes of the townspeople, a mix of sadness and gratitude. The vision of Eleanor faded as gently as it had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of peace. In the years that followed, the Eldridge Library became a beacon for scholars and seekers of the supernatural. They came in search of knowledge, drawn by tales of the brave librarian who had become its guardian. The library thrived, filled with visitors who felt the subtle magic of the place, a sanctuary where the veil between worlds was thin, and protection was assured by the gentle hand of its guardian. The book remained on its pedestal, no longer merely an artifact, but a symbol of the covenant between Eldridge and the unseen forces that watched over it. It was said that sometimes, if you were very quiet, you could hear the soft, reassuring voice of Eleanor, guiding you through the stacks, her laughter mingling with the rustle of turning pages. Eldridge never forgot Eleanor, the librarian who became its eternal protector. Her story was passed down through generations, a legend of sacrifice and protection. And though the library stood serene and the town prospered, there lingered always a hint of the supernatural, a reminder that the peace they enjoyed was guarded by a presence both powerful and loving, nestled in the heart of the library, forever watching over them. As the final whispers of Eleanor's voice faded into the echoes of the library, the book closed softly, the story complete, yet the legend of Eldritch and its guardian forever etched in the annals of the unseen, a haunting melody of sacrifice and eternal vigilance.